Okay, we are up to Parak Yud Daled. We looked at last week, 2 weeks ago, we did an overview of the second half of Sefer Yehoshua, what Chazal referred to as the first half is Kibush, second half is Nachala, first half is Conquest, second half is settlement. But settlement much not necessarily in the sense that we understand it today, where you have a yishuv and you have to go and populate it, etc. Here, it's really a continuation of two major efforts. One is for each tribe to go and claim their region, their territory. And for that, they need to know where that territory is. For that, you need to have a nachla, an inheritance, an area that is defined as this is the area of Shevet A, this is the area of Shevet B. And they have to go and live there and settle the cities there. And there might even be need to conquer some still pockets of Canaanites who may be resisting Israelite presence there. And so all of that, with all of its complexities, is the subject of the second half of Sefer Yehoshua. And essentially, I'm going to give you all the punchline of the entire half of the Sefer, and I'm going to do it now because that's it's not hard to figure out. The major theme from this point in Sefer Yehoshua until the end of the book, more or less, is summed up in the opening verses of Parak Yud Gimel, which is God says to Yehoshua, "Tazakanta bata bayamim, v'ha'aretz nishara harbe meod levishta." You have gotten old, and the land remains very large areas remain to be inherited, possessed, conquered, however you define the word levishta. And therefore, God is commanding Yehoshua to chalek et haaretz, to divide the land, the remaining land, according to the tribes, benachala. And this is only for the 9.5 tribes, because the 2.5 tribes east of the Yarden already received their nachala. They already received their portion. But more importantly, now that the conquest is over, they will be going back to settle in that land, that they know exactly where their shevet is, whereas the remaining 9.5 tribes, not only do they have to conquer and settle in that land, they don't necessarily yet know where that land is. Where is Shevet Yehuda? Where is Shevet Ephraim? Where is Gad and Naphtali going to be? And therefore they have to divide the land bin Nachala. Up until this point, it's been one national army, one campaign, Yehoshua leading the army of Israel. All right, which leads us to the question, what happened to my, can you all still see my screen? Yeah? Yes? There you go. You disappear on me. Okay, let's put you down here. Okay.
We have the text on the screen.
There should be just text on the screen.
Yeah.
Right. What I want to, let me just open up the chat and put in the source pages. The primary one is the maps, which we started to look at last week. That should be the source page in the chat if you want to download these maps, if you haven't already seen them. So the first part of what we dealt with last week, which was the tribes Evrah Yarden on the east side of the Yarden, moving Gad, half of Menashe, leaving the remaining tribes to be divided, and the land to be divided amongst them. And so that's the beginning of Parak Yud Daled. Eretz Canaan. This is now the division of the land in the land of Canaan. And we talked about the ceremonial role of each of these groups as the command, the mitzvah in the Torah to divide the land according to the Goral was to be led by the Kohen, Elazar Kohen. So you have the religious, sort of the Urim V'Tumim, the Shechina's agreement to this division. Yehoshua ben Nun, military and political leadership, as well as the Navi. And Rashi Avot HaMatot, you had to have each buy-in of each tribe to that same division. The Goral Nachalatam, each in accordance with their Goral. It's more complicated than just a Goral, meaning a lot as we understand it, like the Purim story, where you threw lots, you threw the dice, and you saw whatever came up with. That's not what the Goral here means. What it means exactly, we'll talk about a little bit later when we get to chapter 18. That's really where the subject comes up. But for the remaining 9.5 tribes, and again a slight repetition, why are the 9.5 tribes? Because 2.5 already received their portion, and Levi doesn't get a portion, so that leaves us with 9.5 tribes. If you split Yosef, Yosef, Shnei Matot. Menashe Ephraim. Yosef is divided into two, so technically there are 13 tribes. It's just explaining the math. How do you get 9.5 but 2.5 plus 1 equals 12? Well, it doesn't, it equals 13. And that's how the math comes out. Which brings us to Pasuk Vav. That's everything we got up to now. This is where we were at the end of class 2 weeks ago. Vaikshu b'nei Yehuda Yehoshua b'Gilgal. Bnei Yehuda, or the leadership of the tribe of Judah, approach Yehoshua in Gilgal. And the fact that we constantly refer back to Gilgal will become important for us. I'm just going to highlight it every time it's mentioned. Base camp is in Gilgal. Vayomer elav Kalev ben Yefuneh HaKnizi. Kalev ben Yefuneh says to Yehoshua. So now we have the first recorded conversation in Sefer Yehoshua between Kalev and Yehoshua. Now, this is not the first time these two individuals have met. We know that Kalev ben Yefuneh, Yehoshua ben Nun, they were the two spies in the story of the spies in Parashat Shlach, which will be referenced in a moment, that remained loyal to God, to Torah, to Moshe, to the land of Israel. Yehoshua was chosen to be the leader. Kalev survived that generation. They're the only two survivors of that generation. They have a unique status. There had to have been conversations between them up until this point. But nonetheless, the only first recorded conversation appears here. Vayomer elav Kalev ben Yefuneh HaKnizi. We'll see, Knizi here is a whole discussion. What does it mean? The simplest explanation, is we'll see a little bit later in the story, is Knaz was the name of either the family, tribe, or one of the grandfathers. We'll see where it comes up in a moment. Ata yadata et hadavar shediber Hashem al Moshe ish Elokim al odotai v'al odotecha b'kadesh barnea. Kalev approaches Yehoshua and he says to him, you know what God said to us and about us back in the days of Kadesh Barnea. Kadesh Barnea was the city from which, or the launching point from which the spies left to go on their fateful mission back in Parashat Shlach. Says Kalev to Yehoshua, I want to remind you of an event that we both participated in and God's command to us about us at that time. That's the background. What is this relevant to? We'll see in a moment. And so he begins a quick review. Now, whether the review is for Yehoshua or the review is for everybody else, unclear. But a quick review. Ben 40 shana anochi bishloach Moshe eved Hashem oti mikadesh barnea l'ragel et haaretz. When Moshe sent the spies to spy out the land back in Parashat Shlach, I was one of them. I was 40 years old. It's about the first and only place in which we have a knowledge of Yehoshua's, of Kalev's age at the time when he was sent. And at that time, I brought back a report that was in accordance with my heart, meaning everybody else was speaking badly about the land, and I spoke my heart, which was, we should go, we'll conquer. But my brethren with me, parenthetically with the exception of Yehoshua, of course, they made the heart of the people melt. But I followed God, I followed Hashem. You already see, if he's talking to Yehoshua, this is totally redundant and unnecessary. Yehoshua was part and parcel, was a partner with him in that moment. I suspect that he's really talking to Yehoshua by Gilgal, meaning at large, Yehoshua with all of the people surrounding them. He walks into the tent of the chief of staff, so to speak, of the general, and he says, Yehoshua, I have words for you. And this is what he says. וישבע משה ביומו לאמור, אם לא הארץ אשר דרך רגלך בה, לך תהיה לנחלה ולבניך עד עולם. Moshe swore to me at that day, he made a commitment to me, that the land in which I treaded, the land in which I walked, would be given to me as an inheritance for my children after me. Meaning that's exactly why this is here, because it's about the Nachla, it's about which portions will be given to whom. You followed God. So therefore, I'm giving you, Kalev, a reward. What's the reward? The reward is you will get your land. The land that you will get, the land you walk to, you went to. We're now 45 years later, says Kalev, and God has sustained me. I am now 85 years old. We're now exactly 45 years later, and I am 85, because I was 40 when I was sent, and now I'm 85, and we're 45 years later, and you can do the math. I am as strong today as I was when Moshe sent me as a spy. My strength today is just as it was then. If I at 85, we should all be able to say we are as strong as we were when we were 40, or even. My strength to go to war, to come out, to come back. That's to lead in battle. And now I'm asking you, you're going to divide up the land, to give me that portion which God promised me. And you heard on that day, and this is another reference to the fact that Yehoshua was there. So Kalev says to him, you can't deny that God said this to me. Ki anakim sham. There were great giants, great anakim there. And great fortified cities. Ulai Hashem oti v'horashtim kasher diber Hashem. God will be with me, Hashem iti, and I will conquer them. I will drive them out. I will be able to be successful. We still haven't heard what city he's talking about, what city he went to, and what area God promised him. He's been talking in the clouds. He hasn't yet put specifics to it. He says, but there were Anakim there, and great fortified cities. You know that. And if you tell me I'm not capable, I'm too weak, I'm too old to conquer it, Horashtim, then no, then I am just as strong today as I was then. So Yehoshua turns to him and he says, Vayivarcheyu Yehoshua. Yehoshua blessed him. And he gave him exactly what he asked for. Vayiten et Chevron l'chaleh ben Yefuneh l'nachala. This story is about the city of Hebron. If you remember the story of the spies, I'm going to just pull it back for one moment. I had put something else here, but let me just pull it back for 1 second. Midbar, Gimel. This is the parak of the event of the spies. They begin their journey from Kadesh Barnea, Vayalu Negev, they had gone up from the south, Kadesh Barnea, Vayavo ad Hebron, and they came to the city of Hebron. V'sham achiman sheshai v'talmai yelidei anak. Hebron was the home to the great children of Anak, which is typically translated as giants or people of stature. Achiman sheshai and Talmai. An ancient city built 7 years even before Tzoan of Egypt. And they took from the produce of the land as they were instructed, Nachal Eshkol, and then they came back 40 days later. Now, the rest of the time, post Chevron, they went all the way north and all the way south. Like the Chevron was only the first stop along the city. They traveled all the way up north to the Bachamat and all the way back down. Chevron was right at the beginning. The question is, of course, why was Chevron mentioned specifically, and what happened in Chevron? So Rashi there points out, and it's a very famous Rashi, on Pasuk Chaf Bet. This is not on the source page, but I just want to, so we have an understanding of what was going on. Computer is slow today. Rashi there says that if you look at the text, it says Vayalu b'Negev, they went up from the south. Vayavo ad Chevron. If I translate it literally, it means he came to Chevron. Because Vayavo is singular and Vayalu is plural. So Rashi points out that into the city of Chevron, Kalev levado halach sham. Only Kalev went. He was from Shevet Yehuda. Chevron was destined, he was the designated Nasi of Shevet Yehuda. And Chevron is destined to be part of Shevet Yehuda, in fact, eventually the capital of Shevet Yehuda. V'nishtatecha kivrei avot. And Kalev went there to go visit Marat HaMachpelah, to go visit the forefathers, lo yehei niset chavro liot atzatam, that he wanted to pray that he was already hearing the Meraglim speaking negative, he didn't want to be part of that, and therefore he made a special effort to go into Hebron. And that's all it says here. That's a medrash, right? It's a chazal, it's a Gemara Babli that ultimately, when it says he came to Hebron, it's not talking about all the spies, it's talking about just Kalev. That's given support here. When Kalev says to Yehoshua in a whole long conversation, give me that city, give me that portion. And he doesn't name it. But Yehoshua Vayetenet Chevron Kalev, suddenly it's named, suddenly it's identified, because everybody knew what Kalev was talking about. And the only reason everybody knew what Kalev was talking about must be that when the story of the spies actually happened, Kalev took special interest in Hebron, the other spies went on. That's essentially what Rashi is suggesting, that Kalev took special interest in Hebron, and you see it here when Kalev makes that request for his Nachala to be in Hebron. And therefore, the pasuk continues, Aken haytach Hebron Kalev ben Yefuneh hakenizi l'nachala ad hayom hazeh. That's why Hebron belongs to the lineage family of Kalev ben Yefuneh HaKnizi. Yan Hashem ilech alei Hashem Elokei Yisrael. That's his loyalty to God at the time of the Meraglim. V'shem Hebron lefanim Kiryat Arba. The name of Hebron beforehand was known as Kiryat Arba. Why is it called Kiryat Arba? So you all tell me, because there are 4 pairs of great people buried in Marat HaMachpelah. We all know that that's why it's called Kiryat Arba, except that that's not what the Tanakh says. What Tanakh says is it was called Kiryat Arba because Arba was the name of Adam HaGadol Ba'anakim. He was the greatest of the Anakim. So essentially you have the names of the 3 giants here, Shem Achiman, Sheshai v'Talmai, Lidei Ha'anak. Add to that whether the Arba, according to the Ramban, Arba is the father of the 3 Achiman, Sheshai v'Talmai, and therefore Kiryat Arba is referred to as Avi Ha'anakim, either the father of or the greatest of. Right, so you have essentially 4 great, if Anakim, Arba being the father, and Achiman Sheshai v'Talmai his 3 children, however you want to look at that. But that's the reference to Kiryat Arba. Ve'aretz shakita emilchama. The land rested from war. That's the little vignette here of the story of Yehuda. And I'm just going to peek for a moment into the next parak. The next parak begins, Vayhi hagorel l'mateh b'nei Yehuda l'mishpachatam. So Caleb's having this conversation with Yehoshua, and then beginning of Parak Vav, we have a list of the Goral. As we said, this is a whole section of the Sefer is about the dividing of the land. We'll call the Goral, even though it's translated as lots, we'll call it the division of the land for Matei Yehuda, for the tribe of Judah, is the following: a Gvul Edom Midbatzin, and we have a whole list, a description of their border, of their area. More or less, what happens in this section of the Sefer, and this is why I gave you the map, is that in each section of, for each Goral, for each tribe, the Navi describes the general geographic areas that are part of their territory, their tribe, Midbar Tzin, Midbar Paran, Arava, etc., and then the specific cities in each tribe. There's Judah. Judah's not on this map. Let's do it, this map. Okay, and these are all the names of the cities that are listed as part of Shevet Yehuda. So the first half, it gives you the Gvulot, Gvul Edom in the south, Midbar Tzin, Negba, right, in the south. Negev, Miktzai Ayam, and then the boundary works from the southwest corner, meaning the sea, Miktzei Yam HaMelech, southeast corner, Yam HaMelech, Min Lashon Negba. So we're starting from the southeast. Vayatza Minegev L'Malach Rabim V'Yavartzina V'Ela Minegev L'Kadesh Barnea. And the boundary essentially comes up here from, and it gets very technical. It gives you the borders, it gives you the boundaries. Gvul Kedma Yam HaMelech, the eastern border Yam HaMelech, till the Jordan. And then it starts to head north, and what the northern border is. And when it finishes the list of all the borders and all the boundaries, Nasa Gvul, Yetzah Gvul, this is all the different areas, geographic areas. It then mentions, open parentheses, U'leKaleb ben Yefuneh natan chelek betoch b'nei Yehuda el pi Hashem liYehoshua. Caleb ben Yefuneh was given a portion within the tribe of Judah, specifically because of God's command. Et Kiryat Arba avi ha'anak hi Hebron, the city of Kiryat Arba, father of the Anakim, city of Hebron. Vayorosh misham Caleb et shlosha b'nei Anak. Caleb goes to fight against the Anakim who are in this city, namely et Sheshai v'et Achiman v'et Talmai, Yulidei ha'anak, children of the Anak. Those three mentioned already in Parshat Shlach. Yehoshua fights against them. Vayal misham el Yoshvei Devir, and from Hebron he turns southwest to the city of Devir. V'shem Devir lefanim Kiryat Sefer. Devir's original name was Kiryat Sefer. There too he conquers. And then we have another little vignette, another little story in the midst of all of this. Vayomar Caleb. Caleb said to his people, Asher yakeh et Kiryat Sefer u'lechada v'natati lo et achsa biti lisha. If anybody manages to conquer Kiryat Sefer, I will give him my daughter as a wife. If you think that's strange, it's exactly the same offer that Shaul HaMelech made facing Goliath. Whoever would conquer and destroy Goliath would marry his daughter. David is first introduced to Shaul there, does exactly that, and then Shaul relents and doesn't agree to give him his daughter in marriage. That's the story in Sefer Shmuel, but that's exactly the precedent here. And in the end, Vayilkada Otniel ben Knaz Achi Caleb, and in fact, Otniel ben Knaz, brother of Caleb, manages to do so, and he conquers the city of Devir. And so he is merited to marry Achsa, daughter of Kalev. I mentioned before that the word Knaz, Haknizi, Yehoshua Kalev ben Yefuneh Haknizi, his younger brother or younger relation, unclear whether Achi is literally his brother, is Otniel ben Knaz. Kalev ben Yefuneh, Otniel ben Knaz, whether Knaz was Kalev's brother, or Knaz is the ancestry lineage. Again, the names repeat themselves. Vayiteno tachsabito. Vayi b'vorav v'tiziteo lish'om me'et avia sadeh, came to pass, the daughter, Achsa, came to claim land, a field, vatitznach me'al ha'chamor, she got off the donkey, v'yomer l'Kalev malach, Kalev turns to her and says, what can I do for you, my daughter? Vatomer, tnali bracha, give me a bracha. Ki eretz hanegev nitatani. You have given me the land of the Negev. This is a very powerful Musa and so contemporary and so powerful. She says to her father, who settled in Hebron, then offered a challenge to whoever would conquer Devir, and Othniel ben Knaz, who was the first shofet second shofet, first shofet actually, in Sefer Shoftim, manages to conquer. And you've given me a bracha, but you've given me the Negev. You've given me the land in the south. And what is the land in the south and the Negev most challenged with? Prior to the invention of drip irrigation, etc., water. V'natatali gulot mayim. Therefore, I need sources of water. In order to make this land to turn it from a desert into a bracha, into a blessing, it needs sources of water. So he does, and Kalev agrees, Vaitenat gulot ilit, gulot tachtit. There was some upper springs, some lower springs, unclear what they're referring to, but he gives them to her as well. So there's a second vignette related to the city of Devir, that's Conquest, Otniel ben Knaz's marriage to Achsa, and then her request in order to make the land of the Negev flourish, needs water. And so he provides her the areas of the springs that would accomplish just that. That in itself is really an extraordinary contemporary piece of history. If you know anything about the development of the Negev in the south and the need to bring water there. And then, just to fill the picture, Zot Nachalat Mateh B'nei Yehuda LaMishpachatam. This is going to be a pattern we're going to see over and over again. The first part of the story of Shevet Yehuda of any tribe is the Gvul, the Goral, which sets the Gvulot, Vayhi Goral, followed by the Gvul, and the Gvul of all the boundary areas, geographic areas of the tribe, followed by a list of the cities. Vayhi v'zot nachalat mateh b'nei Yehuda l'mishpachatam. Vayu he'arim, the cities of Judah, מקצה למטה יהודה, גבול אדום, נגבה, קופצאל, ועדב, יגור, וקינה, ודימונה, ועדדה, וקדש, וחצור, ויתנן, זיף, ותלם, ובעלות, וחצור, חדתה, קריות, חצרוני, חצור, עמם, שמם, מולדה. These are all names of cities. A list of names of cities all the way. Tziklag, we'll learn about by David HaMelech, and these are all names of cities in each area of Shevet Yehuda, all the way until the very end of the parak. I'm not even going to read it because it would take us too much time. All names of cities. Kiryat Baal, Kiryat Yarim, Bamidbar, you have Midin and Skacha, and all names of cities. Only city of interest, which we'll come to either at the end of Shir today or next week, the last pasuk of it, Hayivusi, Yoshvei Yerushalayim, Lo Yochlu B'nei Yehuda Lahorisham. The Jebusites in Yerushalayim, the B'nei Yehuda were unable to drive out, meaning they were unable to conquer Yerushalayim, the city of the Jebusites. Vayeshev Hayivusi et B'nei Yehuda b'Yerushalayim ad hayom hazeh. And so even though Judah was able to settle and conquer all of their cities, nonetheless, the exception here was the city of Yerushalayim, which remained a Jebusite stronghold until today, the authorship of the time of the writing of the Sefer, unclear, but we'll see that discussion later. So I wanted us to see all of Perek Vav, to see the structure. Essentially, you have the goral that defines the gavul, the borders, the boundaries, and then you have the list of cities. That's how territories were defined. That's when maps were drawn, because they didn't have maps like we have. We have a line and a map like this. What you had was general areas and then the names of cities. And this city was given to this tribe. This city was given to that tribe. That's how boundaries were drawn. There were no maps. There were lists of cities. And that's important later on. We'll see some cities were given to two tribes. Some cities are listed twice. Some cities are geographically in one tribe, even though they are not part of that tribe. For example, the city of Shiloh is sitting in the heart of Shevet Ephraim, according to the text and according to Chazal. Shiloh belonged to Shevet Binyamin. And there are other cities of similar nature. But that's how borders and boundaries were set up. They were set up by lists of cities. And if you continue the pattern, I'm just going to do a quick bird's eye view. Chapter 16, Yehoshua Perek Tet Zayin. Vayetze ha-goral livnei Yosef. The next goral after Yehuda is Bnei Yosef. Bnei Yosef is Menashe and Ephraim. And so we're going to see the border of Ephraim, he gvul b'nei Ephraim, and it'll give the geographic areas, and then it will give us the cities, various cities that are listed there, including cities that are in Shevet Menashe, and territorially, and then you have Vayigoral Mateh Menashe, and the next tribe. After Ephraim goes Menashe, and they have their tribe, their Goral, and their areas and their cities. And so on and so forth. Will continue Perek Yud Chet, Perek Yud Tet, all through the description of the Nile. Why do I mention all of this? I mention all this because essentially everything that appears everything that we have in Yehoshua from Perek Yud Dalet until the end of the section, I should say, is a description of the Nakla, which tribes went where. We have three stories that interject the description, three narratives that interject in the middle of this description of territory, land, and names of cities. And the first is this conversation between Caleb and Yehoshua about Hebron. And so the question that I wanted to raise is, what is the significance of these episodic conversations, these interjected stories? Some of them are related to the Nachla. We saw Conquest of Devere and Nachsan, conversation with Caleb. We'll see in chapter 17, there's a conversation with Ephraim and Menashe about their territory. And maybe that's the issue here too, is that you have Caleb claiming, okay, but he wants Hebron, but the irony of the conversation here is, in a sense, it's premature, because the Goral of Shevet Yehuda, the boundary, doesn't happen until the next chapter. You understand my question? The Goral, the boundary border of Shevet Yehuda, is defined in chapter 15. In chapter 14, before anything started, God has just spoken to Yehoshua. There's a rumor floating around. The tribes are going to be divided up. The land is going to be given to the tribes. It hasn't even hit the public. It's been released it hasn't been released to the public yet. God is still talking to Yehoshua. In walks Caleb to Yehoshua's tent, and clearly speaking in a public way, and he says to Caleb says, I claim Hebron. I haven't even defined the land yet. Okay, you want Hebron? You want Hebron. That means you have to predetermine the Goral, because the Goral has to work in such a way that it will give the southern half of the country to Shevet Yehuda, so that Caleb can take Hebron. But nonetheless, Yehoshua says that was God's command. Caleb gives Hebron to Yehuda, to Yehoshua. So that's my question. What is this story doing here? Why is it in this particular location? It's even before the division of the land itself. And what is its significance? So one technical observation. If I go back to Perek Yudalid, to the pasuk Yud, this pasuk serves a very important technical role. We learn from this parak, from this pasuk, from this verse itself, a very important chronology of Sefer Yehoshua. In fact, we learn the entire chronology of the book of Yehoshua, at least according to Chazal, from this verse. How does that work? What chronology can we derive from the description of Kalev in this text? I was 40 years when I went to the spy mission that Moshe sent, and 45 years later, I'm 85 years old, and I'm as strong today as I was then. That's essentially what he says. From this description, we learn a very important chronology of the book. Namely, I'm going to guess. Yes, no? You still with me?
Do you want an answer?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Kalev was the only one when the tribal leaders went to the land, did what he was supposed to do, because they were supposed to stake out the land.
Right.
And claim it. And now he's back and he said, this was it. I did the right thing and I want the land.
I agree. I just want to know what the chronology is. What chronological key to the book do we derive from this verse? From the ages here. I was 40 years old at the time.
Yeah.
Right? He says I was 40
So
years
there
old.
were, and now he's over 80. So
and now he's
they had
85.
40 years in the desert after they were punished.
And now he's 85. And look, I'm very specific. He was 40 years at the time that he was sent by Moshe, and now he's 85, which means that the Meraglim till today is 45 years. He even says it. That was exactly 45 years ago. He says it.
So they've been conquering the land for 5 years.
Oh, conquering the land for?
I mean, if they were in the
Seven years.
Midbar for 40 years,
7 years.
how do we get 7?
Oh, how do you get 7? Because the Meraglim aren't sent in year 1. The Meraglim are only sent in year 2. From the Meraglim until the end of Chumash is 38 years. And so Chazal derived from this verse the fact that there are 7 years to conquer the land of Israel. The first half of the Sefer Chazal say took 7 years. Now, and I'll show you the Ma'amar Chazal. It's a Gemara in Erechin. I didn't put it on the source page. Actually, I did, really. It's the second source page, but it's the only source we're going to get to today, so I'll just show it to you here. It's on the website. Sheva shekibushu. How do we know that it took 7 years to conquer the land? Meaning from chapter 1 through chapter 12. Right? Is 7 years. Because Kalev says, I was 40 years old when I was sent from Kadesh Barnea for the story of the Meraglim, and today I'm 85. How does that work? Shana Rishana Sam Moshe Mishkan. The first year they're encamped around Har Sinai, they're building the Mishkan from the story of Cheta Egel until the Mishkan is dedicated in Chodesh Nisan of the second year. Shniyahu Kama Mishkan. At the beginning of the second year, Chodesh Nisan of the second year, the Mishkan is built. And then in Tammuz, they send, Rosh Chodesh, they come back to Shabbos, so they are sent Rosh Chodesh Tammuz, Shalach Meraglim, so a year and a half after they left Egypt, they sent the spies. Because when they crossed the Yarden, Kalev bar Kamahava, how old was Kalev? Bar Tmnan Neche Tartan. He would have been 9 and they crossed the Yarden, he would have been Timanan Nechetartin. It would have been 38 years after the story of the Meraglim, and therefore he says, I'm 45 years old. Yishtakach the Sheva Kibshu. And here we learn that they divided the land for 7 years. And they conquered the land for 7 years. Now the Gemara makes another assertion, which is, and Rashi quotes all of this. It took them 7 years to conquer, because the Meraglim was sent in the second year. That means there are 38 years left to wander through the Midbar, and 7 that they conquered makes 45 years. Chazal go one step further and say that if it took them 7 years to conquer, that means that the second half, which is the dividing of the land by tribes, also must have taken the equivalent amount of time, and therefore you have 7 and 7, and hence the assumption that the chronology of the book of Yehoshua is a 14-year chronology, 7 to conquer, 7 to divide, and the end of the Sefer. The problem with the chronology is that Yehoshua dies at the age of 110, and if it's only 14 years, you roll the clock back, it means that Yehoshua at the time of the Meraglim was even older than Caleb. It's complicated a little bit to work that through. Others suggest that you don't have to make the assumption that the two halves of the book are equal in time, but the chronology here is significant. We are 45 years or 7 years into the Sefer, to the book of Yehoshua. So I asked my question: why is this here? Why is the story the very first? We haven't even divided the land. We haven't even divided the Nachla. Why is the story of Yehuda's request, Caleb's request for Hebron, the first thing we read about before we even get to the division of the land? There's several answers that we can put forward, and they're all valuable. I'm going to suggest putting them all together in a moment. But the first and simplest explanation, which appears in the Mefarshim, is that the reason Yehuda's story appears first, not only is the story of Caleb's request for Hebron first, but the tribe of Judah gets their Nachala first, right? Of all the tribes, the first tribe to get their Nachala and then to go and settle and conquer is the tribe of Judah. All of that happens with Judah first because, fill in the blank. Why is Yehuda first? You all know why.
Yeah,
Why is Yehuda first?
I can think of 2 reasons.
Yeah.
One, Yehuda is the acknowledged leader, at least when they left Egypt, and in Yosef's time, from back to Yosef's time. Secondly, Caleb went to Hebron during the Meraglim episode.
No, the fact that Caleb makes claim to Hebron is unquestioned. I totally agree with. My question is, why is this conversation about Caleb and Hebron and the tribal lineage or the tribal territory of Yehuda the first on the list? He's not the oldest tribe. He's not the Bechor. That
He's gonna have the
privilege
king.
belongs to
Also
He's gonna have the king.
Maybe. We
He
don't know
was-
that
he
for a
was a-
fact yet. The first king will be from Shevet
in
Binyamin.
Nesiat HaMasaot,
of Caleb.
he was the first one.
Oh, so you have to go back to
In
a
Nesiat
pattern.
HaMasaot, he was the first one.
Exactly. You have to go back to a pattern set in Chumash, which is that Yehuda will lead the conquest of the land of Israel. When the camp is set up in Bamidbar in chapter 1, it's set up in order of age. Right? The tribal groups are set out in Perek Aleph, the camp, the machane of Reuven, together with Reuven and Shimon is first. Then you have the tribal degel, the banner of Shimon, Reuben, Shimon, Gad. Then you have that Reuben, Shimon, and Gad. Then you have Yehuda, and with Yehuda was Yisachar and Zvulun. And then you have Yosef and Ephraim, Menashe, and Binyamin. and then you have Dan together with Asher and Naphtali. Right? There's 4 camps there, and I wonder if there's a picture of it. No, there isn't. 4 camps there. It starts with the oldest, right? It starts with Reuben. In chapter 2, and from that point forward, the same structure of the camp is set up, repeated with numbers, except that it starts, and the first is always is Judah, and from that point forward, it's always Judah. In other words, the Torah acknowledges that Reuven might have been the oldest in the Bechor. Go back to Sefer Bereshit for reasons beyond our discussion right now. They lost that status. Yehuda becomes the leadership of the tribes, and the Torah establishes the decal, the banner, which was a military campaign. They marched in accordance with their tzavah, how they would define the army of Israel. And the tribe that would lead the army of Israel was Yehuda. And from that point forward, the assumption was, with the exception of Reuben, the notion of the Chalutzim and Sefer Yehoshua, where there are these 2.5 tribes on the east side that have to be at the front because that's the promise they made. But beyond that, the normal routine was Yehuda is first. And you see it a little bit. You see it, for example, in Sefer Shoftim, where the story of a very tragic story called Pelegish Begiva, where they want to go to war against Shevet Binyamin for reasons that are very tragic, and they asked the Batumim, which tribe should lead us? And the Batumim, and the answer was Yehuda Batchila. Yehuda first. There's a medrash that's built on that assumption that Yehuda is always first. What's the medrash? Very famous medrash. Yehuda always goes first. Historically. Who is the head of the Shevet Yehuda?
Kalev.
Kalev is not the head of Shevet Yehuda at that time. At that time, Kalev, the Nesiim are much older. The Kalev is of the younger generation, the generation of the spies. They're listed in Parshat Shlach. In Bamidbar, you have the Nesiim of each tribe, and the Nasi of Shevet Yehuda is none other than
Nachshon.
What medrash about Nachshon ben Aminadab is built upon the assumption that Yehuda always goes first? Kriyat Yamsuf, right?
All right.
Splitting of the sea. Who jumped, according to the Medrash, who jumped into the sea in order to make it split? Nachshon ben Aminadab. Yehuda always jumps first. That's the story. And so that's what you see here. They're about to divide the tribes. Who jumps in first and lays claim to their territory? Yehuda. Yehuda, will, as a tribe, will lay claim to their territory. And that's exactly how the story of Kalev begins. It starts with Vayikshu b'nei Yehuda Yehoshua. All of the children of Judah drew near. This is the first conversation. They haven't even finished. Yehoshua hasn't finished the conversation with God about dividing the land. Yehuda, b'nei Yehuda come knocking at the door. Okay, we're ready for our land. And Kalev ben Yefuneh stands up and says, "Wait a second, I'm top of the line here. I have claim to Hebron." That's number one. There's a possible additional theme that relates to a kind of general embrace of the land of certain tribes that's different from other tribes. Yehuda, Yosef, we'll see similar stories by Yosef, Ephraim and Menashe. There's an embrace of the land by those tribes that's different from the other tribes. That may also play a role here.
Okay.
Sorry, somebody had a question. Was that a question? No? Okay. I want to throw out another possibility. I don't want to raise a very, might be technical challenge, but at the end we'll see that I think that there is a message here that's significant. There are 2 things about the story that disturb me. Here, Kalev lays claim to Hebron, and it seems from this story that Hebron needs to be conquered, right? The Hebron is one of those cities that remains to be conquered. And in fact, Kalev talks about his ability to do so because he's as strong today as he was then. You want to talk about Hebron? Hebron needs to be conquered. I'm there, I'm ready to do it. And in fact, in chapter 15, we have that little vignette about Othniel ben Knaz. That is exactly the story. Caleb ben Yefuneh is given the city of Hebron. He goes and he conquers it. Vayoesh misham Caleb, and he drives out of there the Bnei Ha'anak, Sheshai, Achiman, and Talmai. And from there he goes to Devir. When he gets to Devir, and I showed you the map, right? Devir is just southwest of Hebron. When he gets to Devir, he offers it as a challenge to whoever will conquer Devir, and Othniel ben Kenaz steps up. Okay, that's the story. I want to take you back for a moment to a battle we studied together in the last year. Yehoshua Perek Yud. Okay, this is the northern campaign. Sorry, the southern campaign. Remember how the southern campaign started? There was an alliance made with Givon, then the cities in the south came and waged and lay siege to Givon. Givon claimed from Israel the responsibility to come and defend them. And so Yehoshua moves his camp and attacks and is victorious because of the element of surprise. In that campaign, as the sort of the cleanup of that campaign is taking place, that's the famous Shemesh B'Kivon Dom. We talked about the sun standing still or not standing still. I want to go to the end of this parak for a moment. After it, from one city, after he breaks the siege of Givon, the Canaanites are on the run, and so Yehoshua begins to lay chase at Makedah Lachad Yehoshua. After Givon, he comes to Makedah, and he smites it, and he destroys it, and nobody's left. Comes to Makedah, goes to Livna, Vayiten Hashem Gamotah. Little episode of Gezer. I'm going to skip for a moment, and we get to Lamed Vav. Vayal Yehoshua v'chol Yisrael imo Eglona Chevron. They get to Eglon, and from there they head to Chevron. Vayilachamu aleh, and they fight Chevron. Vayil Kedua, they smite it. They stay victorious. Vayakul leficherev et Malka vet kol harea, its king and all of its cities. Vet kol hanefesh asher ba, lo yishir sarid, nobody's left. Gechol asher asa le'eglon, ve'achrem ota, and they destroyed it. Vet kol hanefesh asher ba. And after they finished with Hebron, where did they go from Hebron? Vayashav Yehoshua v'chol Yisrael imo Devira. They go to Devir. So the story of the conquest of Hebron, followed by Devir, is already recorded in the story of the southern campaign in the aftermath of the Brit of the Givonim and the battle against the alliance of the southern kings. And if that's not enough, in Parak Yud Aleph, we find the next parak, at the end of the parak, we find the following. This is just before the end of the story, the list of all the kings that Yehoshua conquers. This is the northern campaign, the campaign that started with the king of Chatzor. I want to jump to the end. This is a summary of the whole picture. Yehoshua made war with these people for many years. No city made peace with Israel except for the Givonim. And that may have been also by divine design. God hardened their hearts, etc. Yehoshua also at that time destroyed the Anakim from the mountain. Min Chevron, min Dvir, min Anav, Mikol Har Yehuda, and destroyed the last remnants of the Anakim from the mountain, from Chevron, from Dvir. Lo natar Anakim baretz, no Anakim are left, except maybe in Azagat, Ashdod, in the cities of the Plishtim. ויקח יהושע את כל הארץ, יהושע conquers the whole land, ככל אשר דיבר השם את משה. ויתנה יהושע לנחלה לישראל כמחלוקתם לשבטיהם, and Yeshua then divided the land amongst the tribes, which is where we are reading now. Ya'aretz shakta mimilchama. The land rested from war. Jump back to our parak Yudalet, with a description of Yehoshua conquering the land, Caleb conquering the land, Chevron and Dvir, V'shem Chevron lefanim kiyat arba adam agdol ba'anakim, v'ha'aretz shakta mimilchama. That is exactly the same phrase used at the end of chapter 11. What's it doing here in chapter 14? So there is a suggestion, I share it with you because I think it's important to note that it exists. There is a suggestion put forward by Professor Kasuto and Hartum and various other academic scholars on Tanakh, that this story of Caleb is actually out of place chronologically. That Caleb asked for Hebron and Devir back in the middle of the story of the war in chapter 10. When they were heading south and they were about to head to Hebron, Caleb comes knocking on the door of Yehoshua and he says, hey, you're about to go to Hebron. Hebron belongs to me. And that's why Caleb describes not just the years, but also the fact that he's as strong today as he was then. Because this is about not the nachal of the inheritance of Hebron and Devir, or not only, but also the conquest of Hebron and Devir. And that the story may, in fact, be out of place. It may have occurred back in chapter 10 and 11. But it's recorded here. Now, I'm not 100% sure I buy that theory, except for the reference to V'aretz shakta mimilchama. It does explain why it's out of place in the sequence of the Nachla, because it's actually earlier. But even if that's true, and this is an earlier episode that occurred back in chapter 10, anytime you take a parak in Tanakh, and you move it chronologically from its place, and you say it happened earlier or later, one of the things you have to explain is, number one, why it's not where it belongs, which in this case is relatively easy, right? In the midst of the description of the battle of the southern kings, I'm not going to bother with the whole conversation between Yehoshua and Caleb that's taking place inside the tent, right? So I understand why it's not there. It's a distraction there. But why is it here? Why is it the first description, first episode, first conversation that we're going to have between Yehoshua or between Caleb and Yehoshua about this conquest? And I think the answer to that goes back to what we said before. In other words, at the end of the day, even if I were to acknowledge that the story of the conquest of Hebron and Devir may have taken place in the first half of the book, the fact that it's placed here is a reflection of what we said earlier, but why Yehuda was always first. Yehuda's embrace of the land, Yehuda's leadership of the people, Yehuda's sense of responsibility for, especially Caleb's sense of responsibility for the land. That it's Caleb who steps forward and says, I want to go and be part of the conquest of Hebron, even though I'm 85 years old. Whether it's in the story of the war with the southern kings or whether it's here separately, it speaks to Caleb's embrace of the land, continuation of the story of the Meraglim. It speaks to Yehuda's embrace of the land. Therefore, they're the first tribe to receive their territory. Right? So it's all the positives that we spoke about earlier are recorded here, even if Professor Artem is correct and the story is out of place. Okay, it belongs back in chapter 10, but it's here for a reason. And the reason it's here, I think, is to reflect the embrace of Shevet Yehuda in general and Caleb in particular to their Nachla. Here's God saying to Yehoshua, the land remains unconquered. The land is sitting, waiting to settle. unconquered, unsettled. And comes along Caleb and Yehoshua and says, and Shevet Judah and says, we're up, we're ready to go. We want pack our bags, we're there. And we will go and settle in the tribal territory of Yehuda. That's the story of Perek Yudalad and Tetvav. The only postscript I will add, and with this we will conclude, is that as ready as they are, the first tribe to go and to settle their land, to settle their cities, and to conquer their cities, and to list all their cities, as ready as they are, one city remains elusive to them. And that is the city of Yerushalayim. That the Perek ends at the Yevusi Yoshvei Yerushalayim, Lo Yochlu Bnei Yehuda Lo Misham. They were unable to conquer the city of Yerushalayim. And it begins to give us a clue to the fact that as willing and as able and as energetic and as devoted as they were to the conquest of Canaan, there were challenges that they faced. As it starts, God says to Yehoshua, the land remains unsettled, right? You need to go and settle, you need to go and finish the conquest. The tribes have to go and claim and stake their territory. It's not that simple. They can't just move into the cities. They have to conquer them. They have to settle them. They have to deal with the local population. And the Jebusites in Yerushalayim proved to be a challenge too great, even for Yehuda. They're not the only ones, by the way. At the end of Perek Tet Zayin, which we're going to read about, which is the story of Menashe, it says, "V'lo harishu et haknani hayoshev b'Gaza, v'yeshev haknani b'kerev Ephraim ad hayom hazeh." We're going to read about the Canaanites who dwelt in Gezer, and the Canaanites who dwelt, therefore, in the midst of Shevet Ephraim, because they were unable to drive them out at that time. And we're going to continue to read about Canaanites and the Plishtim and other areas that they were unable to conquer, because the sub-theme of this whole section of the book was as successful as the conquest of Canaan was, when it came to settling the land and removing and driving the Canaanites out and creating that idolatry-free zone that the Torah mandated of them, that proved to be a much more challenging and elusive task than the original conquest was. So that's the introduction to this half of the book. Next week, B'ezrat Hashem, we'll talk a little bit about Ephraim and Menashe and their unique relationship to the land as reflected in the next two chapters. And then that will bring us to chapter 18, which I call the Shiloh plan, and we'll go from there.
Thank you.
from Shulman.
Toda.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. See ya.
Excellent. Excellent as
Thank
always.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a
Happy to
good
take
night.
questions. Happy to take questions if there are. No, all good. All right. Have a wonderful rest of the week.
Shikoya.